Hashtag Trending would like to thank Meter for their support in bringing you this podcast. Meter delivers a complete networking stack, wired, wireless, and cellular, in one integrated solution that's built for performance and scale. You can find them at meter.com/HTT. Welcome to everybody out there. This is Project Synapse. It's our weekly AI show where Marcel G, John Pinard, and I try to catch up and try and figure out what's happened in the past week in AI. And we're not only obsessed with it, we're trying to make it work in real life, and that's an interesting thing. We've got a new guest with us, Tony Kaye. Welcome, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. So
this
Tony
is normal,
Kaye,
by the way.
Love it. I'm chair of a company called Raccoon GPT. It's a sovereign AI company, and full-time day job, aside from board activities, I'm the chief digital officer for the government of New Brunswick.
Tony, welcome.
Thank you.
So we did this thing, Marcel, where we went and we did the, what you were calling the bare knuckle round?
Lightning round.
I like bare knuckle round, like in the debaters, better, but that's okay. Just the things that happened in the week, and then we'll get down to some other discussion. But I wanted to cover those things up front because we always leave them to the end, and I always get the feeling that we've go, oh, wait a minute, that happened, did it? So I put together a bit of a list. I don't know if you guys have gone through, but this week, the one thing that knocked me out, when you were at school or taking a course, have you ever missed a day and come back and feel like you missed the world?
Yeah.
More so when I was younger.
Yeah, but that's how I felt this week. I was heads down in my new book, writing for 2 days. I got up and Jensen Huang had bought the world. I don't know quite how that happened. He did, I don't know when the speech happened, but I got a recording of it and was watching it. And Juan got up and talked about a couple of things. NeMo-CLAW. First of all, now OpenAI had a partnership with OpenClaw.
Not with OpenClaw, they hired the developer of what was originally called Claudebot. Yeah, exactly. So they hired him. But it's not like they bought OpenClaw or anything like that. They bought the person who created it.
Correct. But then Steinberger turns up at a keynote with Jensen Huang, and Huang has got NeMo-CLAW. And NeMo-CLAW is as near as I can figure out, a security layer for OpenClaw. And that was a big deal. And Steinberger was somewhere in the audience. But then they've got this whole thing where now NVIDIA is putting together a version of OpenClaw, which they claim is much more secure. They're actually touting it for the enterprise. Now, I never really thought of Jensen Huang as being one of those promoter guys, but he was channeling his inner Sam Altman. It was astonishing.
Are you kidding? Have you seen the guy in his leather jackets for the last 3 years? Come on.
Oh, no, but he's always been the smart guy on stage. This time he was going, this is bigger than Linux. This is bigger than HTML. Yes. This is going to change the world. Peter Steinberger is a hero. Now, we'll stop a second and break that down a bit. And you played with this more than I have, Marcel. Maybe, Tony, maybe you know something about this. I look at OpenClaw and I say, it's great. It's really clever. It's really cool. But it's cron and a number of things it can call agents. What is the earth-shaking discovery that OpenClaw made that is, I understand why it's popular. I get that because it's accessible and people can download it and make their machines insecure. But what is it about it that that technically has knocked it out of the park? Does anybody know?
Yes, I think I can pretty much answer that, or at least I'll take a shot at it anyway. The dream, ever since we had a chatbot that could answer questions and talk to us in real time, was to have this thing do stuff for us without having to ask each and every single time. And the problem with chatbots is you type something, it responds. You type something, it responds. It's a back and forth thing that you're doing all the time. But it doesn't go off and do your taxes or look for products for you or remember what you were talking about yesterday and bounce those ideas around in its head overnight and try to come up with new things for you or work on a project while you're sleeping. These are all the sorts of things that we were promised back when we were watching the Jetsons way back when, a million years ago. And what was done with this is you had basically these harnesses, these wrappers around the tools that already existed, whether they were tools, whether they were MCPs, you name it, the works. The idea now is that you could fire up a machine that would serve you based on everything that you're doing. Take care of your email, do your shopping, blah, blah, blah. It's a wonderful idea. Okay. And it's something that I think most people really deep down inside want. That's why we want a household robot. So it does our laundry for us.
Exactly.
And picks up after us and stuff like that. We don't want to have to ask for every single thing. We want it to just happen. We want servants who work for us 24/7 and anticipate our needs. That's the promise. The problem is it was wrapped up in a way that was deeply insecure and really, to be perfectly honest, damn confusing, except for the part of the one-click install, yes, but once you did the one-click install, you were going down a massive rabbit hole. So everybody understands the promise of this thing. The issues around it are not tiny by any stretch of the imagination, but the promise is so amazing that all of the big companies are getting on board in the hope of providing you something that is both that does all of these things, that delivers on the promise, but is also secure, that will not basically destroy your life 5 minutes after you turn it on. That's the reason. Did I capture that?
I think you passed the audition. Tony, have you had thoughts on this?
Yeah, and perhaps not as much with OpenClaw, but I think in general, and it's interesting the value that LLMs bring us in terms of contextualizing what used to be keyword prompts in devices like Alexa and Google Home. We can now have the ability in vehicles and in our home to automate more ambiguous commands. So if we don't get it right, maybe it still knows what we're talking about. But the disconnect and what Marcel was speaking to is that still requires a layer of script. AI is one thing. And usually when we say AI, we're speaking about generative AI and LLMs and NLP these days. And if that's what we're speaking about, then that does an awful lot for us to be able to position an idea, a concept, or a call to action. The challenge and the disconnect, and I think where the real value is going to be for the major mover and shakers, is going to be around how do you automate those calls to action from a simple command or a simple statement. And I think that's where Claw is trying to go, is to be able to automate that in-between layer to have things actually done and automated. And it won't just be Claw, it will be other things as well. And I think if we can do that in a private and secure manner, better than we've done with keywords in the past, then we're looking at the ability to build more trustworthy agentic AI on top of that.
Jensen Huang comes into this and says, wait a minute, I'm going to help you build this security layer around it. And I'm getting caught into two thoughts at once. One is the whole idea of, okay, this clever thing. The second thing is, how hard is it to do? And that's the thing that, and I'm not trivializing this, but once you know the trick, it's like watching a magician. Once you know the trick, who can't do it? Maybe that's why it's an open source type project. And the control levels that you're working with, or that everybody's working with on Claude right now, and Anthropic's products, they're taking work, breaking it down and distributing it amongst a number of agents as well. So it's not that there's a magic to this technology. Maybe, was it just this guy who was out first? I don't know.
Sorry, which guy are we talking about here?
We're talking about Steinberger with OpenClaw.
Yeah, that was part of it. People have been trying to stitch these things together for a little while, but he delivered a package. Now, one of the biggest problems, and we've discussed this on the show, by the way, on a few occasions, is
I hope
you
so.
have all of this wonderful technology at our disposal, but the question is, what do you do with it? And I think that's one of the issues with something like OpenClaw, or whether it's going to be NeMo-CLAW or Manus-CLAW or whatever it is the various providers comes up with, is trying to get people to wrap their head around what you can do with this thing. And I'll give you a simple example. You guys know I'm looking for a car, and you guys have already decided that you already know what I'm buying. But self-driving cars have been around for a while, but getting people to let go of the wheel is very different than the fact that the stuff exists out there. And I think that this is true with agentic AI as well. It's, it can do anything you want, but are you willing to let go of the wheel? And I think that's going to be a big thing.
And I think if you look at what I'll call consumers, so home users, how many home users are currently writing agents to do things? Probably not a lot. And so if you can create something like a secure version of OpenClaw that is easy to use and gives you the ability to consumerize agents, I think it's got huge potential, right? And if you can get the consumers to buy into it, then those consumers take it to their work environment and say, hey, we should be implementing this and utilizing it to run our business. So it becomes the consumers taking it to the business to sell it, not only the Jensen Huangs of the world trying to sell this stuff.
Yeah,
that's
don't disagree.
Scary. Boy, that's
Yes.
scary. That consumer business coming back into the enterprise. Have we seen that movie before? Didn't end
We
well.
see it on a regular basis.
Yeah, it's not like it ever went away.
No, true. Yeah.
Even the idea of people bringing in their own phones into the office, the whole bring your own device movement was a big thing for a while. Is that still a big thing, John? You would know this better than I would.
It is, but a lot of companies have gotten away from it from a security standpoint.
Yeah. Mine was, when I was a CIO, it was bring your own software. And that was every time I turned around, somebody had a new software program they were working with in their department going, we just put it on our credit card. It's really easy.
Shadow IT, gotta love it.
Yeah.
And now they call it Shadow AI.
Yeah, so if I can just, since we were supposed to be doing a lightning round, which apparently none of us understands what that means.
We got distracted.
Apparently,
this is just the thunder leading up to the lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thunder only never mind.
I can't wait till we get our first copyright strike. I'm almost looking forward to it because that'll mean that they actually recognize the song one of us was singing.
Okay, exactly. So one of the other stories, which is actually slightly related to this, is Jensen was pushing the idea of small models that can run and do things locally to take care of things securely for you locally. And this week, a story that sort of went totally under the radar, but is actually a really big one, is AI released ChatGPT 5.4 Mini and Nano. And of course, the idea of the nano models is to have something that can run locally and securely. And I think that this is a story that's actually a lot bigger than people actually think about. And hopefully, if we have time to get into this at some point today, we can talk about some of the stuff that I was looking at in there. But I think that those small models that do stuff for you, that don't have to think deeply, are a linchpin of this future agentic workflow, particularly in things like whether it's NeMo-CLAW or OpenClaw or whoever's Claw or whatever it is. That's going to be a big deal. It's not just going to be models that, like Tony's model, Raccoon GPT, that are presented to the public or have a public face. You're going to want to have those smaller models doing things for you without having to go out to the internet or go out to the web. But obviously, they're not going to be deep thinkers, but they will be able to do things for you, and that's the important part.
And one of the reasons I want to get Tony on the program, and we will reserve some room to dive into this, because Raccoon is not just a model. She's got a philosophy of knitting this stuff together, and that's one of the reasons why
I look forward to hearing it.
Really thrilled to talk about it.
Yeah, me too.
I want to go back to Jensen Huang just to add to what you did again, because talk about under the radar. In the second part of this keynote, he introduced the concept of that we talked about earlier, about almost replacing enterprise AI with specialized, and not just specialized, but I believe open source models, as well as they would have to be some closed source models. And for various things, he talked about a model for robots. He talked about a model for self-driving. He's hinted at these things, but being the aggregator of a number of specialty AI. And again, he said open source, but I can't believe it. They're all going to be open source models. But Mistral is one of the companies he's working with.
Yeah, Mistral, Perplexity, Cursor, LangChain, a whole bunch of models. And in fact, the whole NeMo-CLAW thing is going to be using an open source secure shell called OpenShell, which is a security-based local wrapper that works between you and whatever infrastructure it is that you're going to interact with. One of the ways to think about it is it's a local sandbox for your agents to operate on your behalf, which adds that level of security because it does act like a sandbox. So yeah, definitely jumping into the whole open source thing. But then most companies, whether they're admitting it or not, are using open source as the core of what they do. That's just open source won the world a long time ago. And sometimes I wonder if, and I'll wonder about this for a while, but sometimes I wonder if the megalith corporations that we're seeing built around artificial intelligence, with possibly the exception of somebody who can provide the inference layer, really aren't going to mean much in the future if we have all these little agents working together, talking to each other. Think about human brains. We, like, the four of us are insanely smart. Like, we're geniuses. We're giants among. Oh, sorry.
Speak for yourself, young man.
That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Speak for yourself.
No, but the point is, it's hard
wait a
for
minute.
single.
Wait a minute. Sorry. Yes. It's early. Need more coffee.
I gave you a compliment and you just spit on it, damn you. Anyway,
Just didn't
the point
expect it.
is,
Sorry.
the point is, it doesn't really matter how smart you are, okay? You need more than one person to create a world as complex as the one that we're living in. This world, the technologies that we have, this is a collaborative effort. And so a lot of people working together to try to get something done is, yes, there is the too many cooks. Somebody has to be in charge, but you need a lot of people to do big work. And I think that the same thing is true for agents. If you've got a lot of small, capable models that can operate on your behalf that don't have to go out to the cloud to do work, but you've got a bunch of them all working together, some of them in your phone, some of them in your computer, some of them in your, I don't know, your air conditioning system, you're going to wind up with a big intelligence as a result of it, as long as there's something capable that's controlling the whole thing on top. So I think that the future in some ways is small, controlled by something slightly bigger. And we'll wait and see.
Okay, we'll come back to this. But the thing that this, you talked about sleeper stories. Up on that big up the big stage where he's got all of the names up on the wall, two ones distinctly missing. Three if you want, or maybe four. There's no OpenAI up there. There's no Anthropic up there. There's no Grok up there. And people don't treat Meta like it is one of the AI giants. It is. Instead, he's got Mistral. And that, I think, sent a message to me. I don't know. Are we going to say thank you very much for your billions of investments, OpenAI and the rest of you? And by the way, now we'll just take these other models and move on. That to me seemed like a distinct possibility. Tony, I see you're nodding your head.
I think it's complex. I think it's, you have your frontier LLMs and the engines behind those and the mass amount of money that's required to build those LLMs in the first place, but then what those institutions now have to be able to build on top of that. And so maybe they're at a bit of a behind the position in terms of the future applicability. So these open source LLMs, you're able to look at almost air gap solutions or private deployments. And so if you have an open source LLM, the question is it good enough to do what that task needs to be done? Can it be done in a way that can be deployed for a much lower cost? And it comes down to feasibility and viability. And sometimes when we think about what will the future cost of this actually be, it may be very difficult for the frontier LLMs to compete on that. But where they may win is in this current opportunity that they have with such large amounts of capital to get behind where the future is going around agentic scripting and automation. So if we see more of what CLAW is doing, because the frontier LLM manufacturers and institutions have more money, they may be able to stay ahead of the game. But I do think the open source LLMs will have more applications in terms of what you're able to do from a portability perspective.
Yeah, I think this is a topic we're going to think about more. Just in terms of our supposed lightning round, which is slowing down, but Andrej Karpathy. Everybody remember him? Am I saying his name right? I can never get it right. By the way, Canadian. Not a lot of people know that. Turns up, he worked at OpenAI. Then he worked for Tesla. Then he quit to go off on his own. And all of a sudden, bang, there's a new open source model again demonstrating self-learning. And again, another sleeper issue, because we've been dealing with, has been these massive training sessions, doing those levels of training, spending millions of dollars training the models. And we've always been defeated by this idea of, why can't it just learn? And I can't wait for this, because this week, new models must have dropped, because every model I worked with did that same thing that just makes you crazy. It gets to a point where it makes a mistake and it will never back down from that mistake. You can say all you want. You can say, change this, do this, and it'll just give you the same thing over and over again. And when that happened both, and I was working on something, thank God it hasn't happened in what I'm doing with Claude this week on just one project, which is huge, because if I had to abandon that now, stop it, it would be hours and hours of work that would go by the way. So this happened. So Carpathy comes up with this idea of self-learning, which also changes not just the dynamic, but it also changes how we think about AI itself if it can start to learn. And all of a sudden, because you see one thing, you see it all over the place. A little program, was it Minimax, came out, and they were talking about much the same thing. So this self-learning thread worked its way through a number of stories this week, and it's still early, but I can't wait to see what happens with that.
Well, by the way, I believe it's Andre, and he was a student of Jeff Hinton, by the way.
I also wonder, though, that if we talk about these small models, you talk about personalized models. I almost wonder at some point in time if you're going to get to a point where I want to be able to run an SLM on my computer, and so the ability to have my own version of a model on my computer that has the specifics that I'm looking for, because I don't need to figure out how to do aerospace and things like that, that there's just very specific things that I want to do. And to have it be able to go, if I ask it something that's not part of that model, have it give me the opportunity to say, hey, I don't have that information within my model. Would you like me to go out and download it to expand your personal model? Right? So that you almost create customized personal models based on your desires, your needs. I think, and it's not only from a personal standpoint, but you talked about self-driving cars and things like that it could be the same way. I remember back in the old days with GPS, when it first came out, you downloaded certain maps depending on where you're going.
Those were the days.
Those were the old days, back when you had to download your own map.
That's right. But it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah.
Just to frame this, so what he did, this was a 2-day project, by the way, the Carpathy, Andre's. This was a 2-day project. He wrote a Python script that I think he called it auto research. And the idea was that it would iterate and in the background iterate and try to come up with improvements on the model. And obviously using a small model and something like that. And he ran it it went through several hundred iterations looking for improvements, ways to speed up the model, ways to improve the efficiency, and so on. Like I said, 2 days. And the number that he threw out was that it came up with an 11% improvement in performance and quality over that period of time. And this is just something that he ran as a side project. So if you think about this in terms of Frontier Labs, okay, if they can put their own resources towards that sort of improvement using the same sort of technology, same sort of idea, this could be pretty amazing. An 11% improvement. We're at the level right now where we get excited when on these benchmarks that are all approaching 100%, we get excited when we're 2 additional points up beyond. It was like 17.2 last week and it's 17.4 this week. Or 97.4 this week. There's definitely a future here. And I think that big companies that are making these models are definitely going to be paying attention, including open source ones like Mistral and so forth. They're all going to look at this and incorporate it into the way that they develop models.
Well, we have to do something. Maybe this is a lot like Moore's Law. Everybody's been talking about the death of Moore's Law, but and it's hard to describe this for people who are listening in audio, but if you look at, there is the big discovery that drove OpenAI forward was this logarithmic, and I'm sorry because I'm not a math genius, but a logarithmic line that they really talked about, a curve. And it said the bigger you got, the better you got. It's as simple as that. But you couldn't cross this line. And you couldn't get past a certain limit. So you could keep adding resources, but eventually you're going to hit the end of that. And that's a simplification of it for anybody who really knows math out there. My sincere apologies, but that's really what it is. And if you reach that limit of that, which you essentially were doing with size and data, then you have to go somewhere. Jeffrey Hinton's talked about this, that we won't make the next leap in intelligence till we get a new development. And that, I think just in terms of our lightning round idea, I think those ideas are starting to percolate out. And I don't know where they're going to go. Some of these seem pretty simplistic, as you said. Why didn't they think of that before? But then some of the great ideas in the world are simple once you think of them. So interesting. I want to drop the lightning round there, if that's okay, unless somebody wants to come back in.
Yeah, no.
Marcel, I want to talk about what you've been doing this week.
So let's go to my project. My project, I called it Nexus. Nexus is in being an intersection point and all that sort of stuff. And I decided that I was going to create my own version. So what I did was I decided that running OpenClaw was dangerous, and and quite frankly, the overhead and the weirdness made it so that it didn't feel like something that I was answering the questions that I wanted answered, in other words, or gave me the tools that I wanted access to. And basically, I did want that assistant. I wanted something that would remind me of things, that would build up lists, that would give me the news stories of the day in the morning. You remember when we talked about Pulse, I told you about running my experiment for a month on the pro plan of OpenAI. And I said Pulse was a cool thing because it gave me the overnight thinking. And here's some things that you might want to think about today based on that. And here are the stories. I thought this would be a great idea. So what I did was I built the first version of this agent that would do effectively the same thing as OpenClaw, except my own version with my constraints, with my security built into it. And the first phase was I just wanted something that could use a model. And in this case, I actually used Claude. I used both Sonnet and Haiku in the background, depending on the complexity of what I wanted it to do. So step number one was a core foundation with an SQLite database in the background, because open source, cheap, and it would remember the things that we talked about. So this is one of the things about OpenClaw that they pushed right out of the gate, is it would remember your conversations. It kept the file of all of the conversations. So effectively a RAG system that was always accessible, unlike where you close a chat and you have to say, it forgets about the chat that you had before. This remembers all of the conversations and all things that you're doing with a database. So that was like the first phase. So I built the memory store, the Anthropic API wrapper, a memory injection system, tag parser, interactive readline loop streaming system, nightly compression. So basically take all of the things that we talked about during the day and take it down to the important facts. In other words, extract the important bits of information. Thank you. So that I can create a summary. And in fact, that was one of the other things that I wanted. Once all the conversations of the day were done, I wanted it to write me a journal. I have for my entire life thought I should really journal. I'm a writer. I've written several books and thousands of articles. You would think that journaling would be like one of those things I could do. No, it's not. I'm terrible at this. So I thought, hey, if something could capture all of the things that I was doing and write me a journal entry. So that was one of the first things I thought about in the core phase, in the first implementation. So the memory compression, context review stack, and a configuration system so that I could change things as I went along. So then I told it, every step of the way when I make changes to this agent, I want you to document it for me, so that I have a manual that follows everything that it's got, so I can go back and refer to it and see all the things that I asked for. Next phase, I want to be able to access the things from wherever I am. So Famously, OpenClaw will use Telegram or WhatsApp or whatever. Telegram is the easiest one because you can fire up bots on the fly, and it's got a really well-documented API that you can use to connect to it. So this is what I did. I built Telegram integration so I could, from my phone, chat with my agent and have it. So I'm thinking about something right now, and I want you to document it right now so that we can go on. So that was my phase 5. Phase 6, daemon mode. I want it to run in the background because the first version that I had was scrolling and I could just interrupt it, but it had to have a window that was open where all the stuff was happening. I wanted to demonize and run in the background. So that was the next step. Client notes. I want to work with different clients, so I wanted to maintain databases of the different clients that I work with on the fly. Project status was the next phase where I had it keep track of projects that I'm working on and build specs as well. In other words, this is what I'm thinking about. Generate the specs for this project. I'll take this. I'm not going to make the agent do this, but I will hand it over to Claude Code, the specs to Claude Code, and I'll ask Claude Code, oh, by the way, these are the specs that my agent came up with. Can you think of some way to improve on this, to iterate on this? And of course, I've been using that to build the agent, to make Nexus even more powerful, to do more things. So then I've got a bunch of bug fixes, whatever. Now, the next thing that happens is, because I'm maintaining all of these things, I need file system tools to be able to read and write all these files and so forth. Build that into it. Then, of course, since I've got all this information, I want to be able to search through this information. So I used FTS5 as a file search tool to be able to integrate file search across all of the different databases that I built. SQLite has a very well documented and easy system of file searching. Built that into it.
Marcel, when I grow up, I want to be just like you.
This is all in a week, by the way. This is all over the course of a week. Next thing, multi-agent dispatch. I can ask it to do things, but then it was waiting, like it would go off and do something and then it wouldn't come back. So I told it, if there's anything of any complexity that's going to take more than a few seconds, I want you to dispatch an agent. So I created an agents MD. I created an agents MD with instructions on how and when to launch agents to do things in the background. And then I got tired of typing. So I built a voice input using Telegram, because Telegram's got a little thing, or on the web or whatever. So I can just talk to it, which meant I had it create a local whisper agent to translate my speech into text so that I could talk to the system directly without typing. Next thing, there are things that I would like to see on a daily basis, like the weather, for instance. I want weather updates. Again, there are open source things that you can type into to open weather information. So brought that in. Next thing, daily AI and tech digest. I'm so sorry, Jim.
He figured the best way to do it, Jim, was he just has a link that takes him straight to hashtag trending and cybersecurity today podcast.
I built my own Jim Love to bring me the news stories every day at 9 a.m. It brings me a digest of 7 different sources in order of what it considers are importance. I built a to-do list system into it. I hard-coded model literals. And then the final thing, which I did the day before yesterday and fine-tuned yesterday, was I thought I need a central place to administer all this thing. So I built myself a web dashboard, a responsive web dashboard using modern CSS and stuff like this. And then the final thing, I thought, I can't see this properly on my phone. So I had it turn it into a responsive web front end, tied the whole thing in through Tailscale VPN so I could access it from anywhere without having to worry about security or remote access or something. So I'm using Tailscale for a VPN layer for this whole thing. And then finally, this is the very last thing, and I swear I'm going to end here. I realized that almost all of my API costs, because you can only do this through an API, right? Because it's against the terms of service for OpenAI, for Meta, for everybody's terms of service say, you can't use your subscription to run an agent model like this. You have to use the API. I noticed that almost all of my API costs were going to Telegram. Okay? That's where the big money was. I'm serious. That's where the big money was Telegram. So I had it build a framework so that it would use the web's presence through my Tailscale connection to send me notifications to my phone without me having to use Telegram. So now I can just do everything through a web interface on my phone using this responsive chat. It does everything that Telegram does. It sends me the notifications, and I've cut my API cost down dramatically. So that's been my project. Nexus is live. It works. I'm already loving it. It takes care of shopping lists, to-do lists, clients, phone calls, things that happen to me during the day, builds a journal. Nexus.
Journaling? That's all you got out of this? Journaling? Reminds me of that old joke of the guy who, and it is an old joke, I've heard it before. Guy comes up to a ringmaster in a circus, and the ringmaster says, "What do you do?" And the guy flaps his arms and flies around the tent, does a perfect 3-point somersault, lands in front of the ringmaster, and the ringmaster says, "Bird impressions? That's all you do? Bird impressions?" That's a week. Right?
Yeah, that's a week. That was my week. It was one of those things, and it all started with the idea of I wanted to be able to keep track of things and be able to go back to it in a way that made sense. And I wanted it to be interactive because I suck at this. I really do. I'm not a good planner. I know it sounds weird, like somebody who's done all these things presumably would be able to plan, but all the planning happens up here. I suck at actually to-do lists. You're supposed to write out to-do lists. You know what I do with to-do lists? I lose them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I've got 60 to-do lists and all kinds of programs that I've tried to develop that would actually aggregate my to-do lists. I've got everything except the ability to find the to-do list to check the to-do lists. So
there you go.
And
but
that's
anyway,
why...
so the last thing I want to add about this is I have taken this to the degree that aside from keeping the documentation up to date for all of this, it does keep a change log. So I can go back and take a look at all this. And I have a private GitHub. At the moment it's private. Maybe I'll unprivate it. I'll make it public at some point. But I have this as a GitHub project. And it, like I said, it maintains the documentation, keeps everything up to date. I'm not doing any of this stuff. I just have my agent do all of this stuff. The really heavy duty coding, I turn over to Claude Code, but my agent is the one that generates the specs to begin with, which I then hand off to Claude. A week. I started this on Monday.
And do we get to see it?
What's that?
Do we get to see it?
I'll show it. I'm not going to, because I've got private information on my dashboard, I'm not going to show it off at the moment.
But this is what I was getting at and you obviously have had the benefit of doing a lot of open source work over the years, different tools and things like that. But you're not the only guy out there. And that's what I've always been mystified by why, and maybe it's just being in the right place at the right time, why Steinberger is just a darling, because there have to be dozens of these. And by the way, I've seen 3 YouTube videos of people doing slightly different directions, but who've built all kinds of stuff as well. I find this really interesting to see if you actually will be able to contain this or whether we'll just have multiple projects all around. Somebody's going to commercialize it for the people. And like you said, John, right now, even just agents, there are a couple of services where you don't have to write an agent. You could just go on to them. I came up with a couple of them last week where you could just go on and it'll write an agent for you in 10 seconds. They set up all the background and all of that. So it's really messy right now. It's interesting. And
but that's part of the fun. That's part of the fun, that it's messy. Open source has always been messy. It's part of the reason I got excited by this stuff back in the late 80s. And of course, in 1991, when the first Linux kernel came out, I jumped in 1991 into the Linux world. I mean, that early, because I was so excited by the idea of this messy open development environment, all these people building things. It's heady. And here we are in 2026, and in a strange sort of way, because of all of these things, I'm finding that magic again when it excites me.
But at the enterprise level, and this is one of the things that enterprise needs dull to succeed. And because I grew up in this open source thing, and I still remember working for one company with this guy, and he just chain smoked cigarettes. He was a French guy, and he chain smoked cigarettes. Yeah. And I'd come in the morning, we'd have stuff from a customer, and we had to build this beautiful, big open source program. It was wonderful because you never had to buy anything for this. It was all open source, and you could install it, and it would fit your needs and all that sort of stuff. And I'd come in with stuff from clients, and this guy'd be sitting there in the morning. He'd been up all night smoking cigarettes at his desk. You got to see what I built. I said, tell me you fixed the bugs. Jim, don't think small. Tell me what you got to see what I built. I ran point on that project, just about went insane, which is, but I think between the balance of the creativity, and the creativity has to be there, don't get me wrong. I think this is a wonderful thing, but somebody's got to bring this together and maybe the winners are going to be the people who commercially bring it together. Tony, can I bring you into this discussion at this point? Because this is something you must be thinking about. When you look at Raccoon, first of all, can you tell us what Raccoon is, just so because I think it's really easy to think, what's a Canadian AI? Okay, move on. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, it's an interesting little critter. We've seen the problem, I think, in the public sector initially, and through to these highly regulated, and I worked in the energy sector for quite some time, and I've worked with financial institutions, and really any major institution that has core IP will have a mature organization in terms of privacy and security. And when we've seen a number of these new applications come out, and this goes back to your earlier comment on BYOD and letting your employees run amok, when you have a larger organization in the thousands, the challenge is, how do you really capture privacy and security for those that may not be aware of certain policies and directives, best practices, those types of things? And it always comes back to a fail-safe is, would we put our arms under a moving saw if we needed to repair and do maintenance? No, we've got lockdowns for those to protect ourselves. And so Raccoon was intended to build in those protections so that we can't hurt ourselves. So one thing in a lot of the commercially available products, and if we're just talking about generative AI in particular, the biggest challenge here is in, where does your information and your data go? What is it susceptible to? What are the states of data? So is it here? Is it processed here? Is it processed out of country? What are the impacts of that? What are the potential risks? And every CISO across North America is going, absolutely. And this is the challenge here, is sometimes the nuances in the back-end architecture of how you have to keep everything, for Canada at least. In Canada, LLM processing is one example. And the other would be, what tool sets and vendors are you utilizing? So this whole concept of a sovereign AI application is very complex, because we rely so heavily on a lot of international institutions and vendors and products. And so what we can control is the ability to protect our information around privacy and security. And Raccoon has built a system that does in Canada LLM processing and keeps all of the information within Canada, so that even if you're not sure if you're at risk, it's controlled for you. Right down to the individual user would be able to have their information protected. Not even our admin can go in and see what your prompts are. And so what this boils down to is, we are able to protect the highest levels of most sensitive information, protected C and above, with artificial intelligence that complies with all of your privacy impact assessments, your technology risk assessments, business impact assessments, that really are necessary to ensuring that we can protect information that's sensitive. And in the public sector, that's critical. But aside from public sector, this is risk-adverse organizations should want to protect their information. Would you take a picture of your credit card and post it on LinkedIn? Hope not. But our digital footprint is so broad, and the information that we provide to certain providers, whether it's used for machine learning, and you can toggle that off in a lot of these applications, but even if you do, the ownership of the information that you provide still resides with those organizations. In Raccoon GPT, we do not keep information, we do not store it. The information that goes through that is saved as far as prompting goes is stored on Canadian servers. And this is something that is scalable and replicable for any jurisdiction. It could be the UK, it could be UAE, it could be United States. At the end of the day, information and privacy concerns are legitimate regardless of your jurisdiction. So this is a replicable process that I hope that we can set standards around privacy, and then probably standards around public safety in terms of the architecture and the scaffolding that we have to wrap around LLMs in our service delivery, that don't allow us and don't allow citizens to go in and potential threat actors to go into these systems and ask, hey, how can I build something nefarious to do something that we probably shouldn't do in society? And so that that scaffolding is very complex and it's very tricky, because if you build the scaffolding into not allowing certain bad behavior, are you preventing something such as business development where someone needs to go in and find a contact? So the benefits of LLMs is a very difficult fine-tuning system. And that's something that we worked hard on within Raccoon to try to find the balance of safeguards for public safety, protection on your most sensitive information, but still allowing it to be as productive as possible. And I still think generative AI is probably the worst use case for society. I think we can move far beyond that. And I think that's where we're going. And that's one thing that I'm looking forward to building into some of the secret sauce behind, without giving too much out, is this Agentic easy button. So the ability to automate your most tedious tasks and to build out those types of scripting that wraps around these LLMs to help us do the things we don't want to do, so we have time to do the things that we do want to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think there's a convergence that happens at one point of being able to provide the, what do you want to call it? The environment, the play space, the safe place for both these new expert AI models, which I think is the future. I think the generative AI model is great for large language models, but the medical model, the robot model, the self-driving car model, Jensen Huang's already bringing them together. The ability to be able to do that as securely, which is the issue that drives people like John crazy, is where's my data? These are simple questions. All this creativity is going on. They're simple questions. Where's my data? Can somebody mess it up? Can somebody steal it? Can they trick the agent into doing something with that data that they're not supposed to do? That's solving that question will make this enterprise ready, I think.
Yeah. And the normal person doesn't care. They don't think about where's my data and all the rest of that. You talked earlier about shadow IT, Jim. Now it's all about shadow AI, that we say you can only use these models, but people will figure out ways to go around it and use whatever they want. And one of the things Marcel and I talked about a while back was with ChatGPT, you can tell it to not use your information to train the model, but it retains your history. However, with Gemini, if you want it if you want to retain your history, the only way you can do that is by letting it use your information to train the model.
Yeah. And I could tell you one thing, and I'm sure Tony will, from his work, will actually validate this. That data doesn't disappear.
Yes.
And it doesn't get more secure just because the model doesn't learn from it.
Yes.
Your data's there. It's findable. And I still maintain that if I set about to design an insecure system for storing and processing data, I couldn't do any better than we've done with large language models. I think they perfected the lack of security.
I'm fond of saying that people don't care about security and they don't care about privacy. They say they care about security. They say they care about privacy, and then they just turn it over without a second's thought to people. And the fact is, there is going to be a market for personal access. I was looking took a tour of your website there, Tony, and there are personal and there are organizational plans, and people are going to be willing to pay for that sort of thing. But most people are going to take the thing that is the easiest and the least friction possible to get access to the technology, and they will happily give away their privacy and happily give away their security for access to those things.
And even from a business perspective, as we said, that everybody's got the concern of security and so forth. But if it means it's going to cost them more money or take them longer to get things to market, guess what the first thing is that goes by the wayside? Security.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. The people like the OpenClaw or my Nexus project, all of these things are available presumably to everyone, okay? But not everybody is going to do these things. And in fact, very few people are going to do these things. I am building something that I am already using, that is already useful to me in a very short period of time. I will continue to iterate on it. I will continue to improve, and it's mine. And that had been my philosophy for many years. And I'm going to continue to be doing this. But the vast majority of people out there, and by the vast majority, I'm talking 99.99% of the people out there, are never going to touch these tools. And as popular as OpenClaw or NeMo-CLAW or whatever it is going to be, we're all going to turn it over to somebody else. We're not going to be like, we, as in the global we, are not going to be taking responsibility for these things on our own. We're going to turn it over to somebody else. And that's just a fact.
And I think that's one thing
Tony,
that we see is a lot of the general consumer, and it's easy. It's easy to go on what's the quick free thing to use, and that will always be the case. And it's the interesting thing about Raccoon GPT is that there's no free tier. So it's intended for institutions and enterprises that understand the value of privacy and security. And so if you have 10,000 employees, that's the build. But above and beyond that, what we're seeing is really the need for foundational agentic build out. So if you're going to, regardless of generative AI and the usage of wide deployments of Copilot or other applications within the enterprise side, the real value is around agency and building that out. But if you're going to build it, you need to have that foundational privacy and security at its core. Otherwise, you're building on top of a very weak foundation. And that's really what we're trying to push, not just for ourselves as a business, but I think for protections of our interests as we build up our Canadian ability to innovate and compete globally. We want to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is built from a proper foundation. And those that are in the know and those that are listening right now obviously do understand that you do want to build your agentic AI on top of a foundation of trust and privacy. And then your ability to attain that ROI, because we're no longer looking for a problem to solve, we're solving the problems that exist, becomes more evident.
Can I pin you down on a couple of things here, Tony?
Absolutely.
Like, are you willing to divulge what model you're using under the surface or what technology you're using under the surface?
Yeah, and it's a hybrid model. If you think of the analogy to a vehicle, gas, electric, there's benefits to both, and we are continually evolving. So one thing I will say is we don't use any information to train a model. So the models that we use are trained.
But you're using a model somewhere, like you're using the base model from somewhere, though.
Yes. So the core model we're using is GPT 4.0. The only way you can have in Canada LLM processing would not be through like a global service standard. It would have to be a national service standard or a PTU, which is a provisional throughput unit. Your PTU is one thing that allows us to keep your LLM at a certain service standard, a certain model, while keeping your in Canada processing, LLM processing as well. You can do that and achieve that through a national standard, but you may be subject to throttling up and down of your models. Global service standard would be out of Canada LLM processing, but the devil's in the details. So if you architect this system, and this is something that hopefully other vendors across Canada or other countries will understand, is if you are working in a jurisdiction that has certain privacy restrictions, you cannot build certain models, frontier or open source, off of certain backend as well. So for example, you couldn't build an OpenAI GPT 4.0 LLM delivery system off of AWS Bedrock and still have in Canada processing. You would have to build it off of Azure. So understanding the complexities of your backend architecture, feeding into the LLMs that you use, that's one piece. The other piece of this is cost optimization. It's not necessarily feasible for an organization of 50 to 400 to build these systems themselves because there's this whole scaffolding that has to wrap around and an understanding of what is that scaffolding to add these extra layers of protection above and beyond privacy and security. And so if you think of your fixed and variable costs that go into building a system, it's often easier to have an organization or an entity or an application that's scalable that can be applied to these smaller systems. And then when you were asking about the LLM specific, and I want to get back to that one, there are cost optimizations that are benefit to both the provider and the customer. And understanding which LLMs can be optimized in which use cases is one piece, because some LLMs are more cost effective, secure, safe, and can do the same work as others at a lower cost. And one example would be Azure AI Translator, trained off of French language here in Canada. That's one type of LLM that you could use for translation type purposes. There's other LLMs you can use for other types of applications as well. So depending upon the type of task, we can switch between certain LLMs to provide the best result at the best cost with the best privacy and security. So this will constantly evolve. Open source LLMs will certainly be a big piece of this as we go forward as well. And then as we start thinking about hardware and connected applications, that'll probably move more into the open source LLMs that you can have without having to call the internet, because those will become cost prohibitive. You can imagine your Alexa speaker, and I'm sure everyone's speakers are going off in the background now. But if you have one of these and you're calling on an LLM, the cost of this is going to go through the roof. So I think there are certain applications to understand cost optimizations for those types of applications as well. It's a good thing that wasn't a lightning round.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you offering voice services and stuff like that? Or are we talking text-wise? Like, as in there is a personal plan. How do you see the personal assistant side of this?
So I think when we think of voice and ASR and those types of things, those are easy little add-ons. So whether you type or you want to speak to your application, that's one piece. That's more of a feature. That's a build out for us. I think what we're looking to do is once we're able to provide the foundational tool set, and this is augmentation to an organization's Copilot licensing, which that's a separate discussion altogether. Then you have the ability, if you invest in something that's private and secure, to build that foundational agentic AI off of. So this is a system that's intended to provide deeper privacy and security for organizations that want to build their own agency. But it can also be used at the moment just for your, basically a secure alternative to a chat GPT.
Yeah.
Now, we're talking about, obviously, the whole idea of a sovereign AI, so to speak. And I'm putting "so to speak" in quotes here. But but if you're using 4.0, you're still
That's right.
working with OpenAI servers, presumably in the US, right?
That's right. Not so much the servers, but the LLM itself. So this is the difficulty with the word sovereign. We can do a lot of things to protect information within Canada, but sovereign also has to do with availability. And we do rely as a country on a lot of these Microsoft, Amazon, etc. So it's going to be a very difficult problem to tackle, but we can do a lot of things. And what we can do is we can protect the states of data. We can protect where we have our information processed. We can look at various guardrails and safeguards that we can wrap around that. And we can keep all our storage in Canada as well. And this is just from a Canadian perspective, but you can do this for any jurisdiction, right? So US, UK, wherever.
Now, I have no trouble imagining the corporate client here or the organizational client. I have no trouble imagining that whatsoever. How do you see your, if you'll pardon the expression, ideal personal client, the average person off the street, or is this really not where you're aiming at all?
We're not. So I think when you think of your going back to my academic days, when you think of a beachhead market, really beachhead for this initially, geography wise, would be Canada. But you want to think about the types of individuals. So this would be a B2B, meaning business to business. Large enterprise would have the largest value from something like this. Individuals that are concerned about their information can use it. So there is the ability for individual licenses. But we're not, as I said, there's not a free tier. That's for a reason. And we're not going after necessarily individual consumers. Not that we don't welcome everybody. It's just I do feel that there is value in free tools so long as you know what not to put into it. And I think a lot of people will use those free tools, and it's a tough market to go after. For us, it's certainly something that we're able to serve, but it's not going to be the core of the business. I think the big piece is an enterprise value.
Yeah, that's the way that I saw this, because the personal side was the hardest one for me to wrap my head around there.
But these two things are still interrelated, and that is the creativity that's happening at the personal level is also going to be driven into the enterprise because people work in enterprises. This is blurry. I appreciate the fact why we have to do something at the enterprise level that is foundational, because we're in a crisis. If COBOL is the new asbestos, we found it in all our buildings. it's going to kill us. We better damn well get rid of it. And at one point or another, we're going to have to do that. And these big systems that are running out there, or even with more modern languages with millions and millions of lines of code, are just unsustainable in the long run, and particularly in the force of people, of workers who've learned to be agentic, and the fact that even if we don't have personal workers being agentic, we're going to have agents. So the system, the enterprise system we have, is not sustainable in an agentic world. And I'm not overhyping this. We know that agents they're going to happen. They have happened. You can't stop it. And so those two forces are going to pull at each other. And I think that the idea, and the third one, of course, of sovereignty, I have a particular view, and that is that I don't think a nation can be sovereign if someone else controls their AI. And you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, have your opinion, but don't tell me you're sovereign if someone else controls your AI, because anybody can figure this out. And we talked about my idea of security for AI. You can change what an AI presents to your population as information in it easily, very easily. And we've seen it. We've seen Grok and what Musk has been able to do to that in a day or two in terms of changing it. We know what it can present to you. And as I was talking to Tony, and I've started to talk to other people, I said, how many people still Google things? Does anybody still Google things? And even if you do, you get an AI summary. But I'm using Comet, or I'm using ChatGPT, or I'm using whatever tool I'm in right now to go out and find the stuff that I want. I'm looking at whether I want to buy something now, and I'm saying, look, I just haven't got the time. Go and look at all the products, list them for me, tell me what the good pluses and minuses are. And at one point, I would have searched, I would have read their websites, found their pathetic information where they didn't tell you the price or what the thing really did, but some marketing person told you, it's great, it's wonderful, it's terrific. What does it actually do? Now I let the AI be frustrated for me and come back with the information it can find. When you control that, forget about privacy. When you control that information, you control a nation. And it's not oh God, I'm not going to say hyperbole because I hate that. Everybody's doing a Joe Biden impression with hyperbole. It's not an exaggeration.
I think that the web as we know it is effectively dead, or as we knew it is effectively dead. If we are entering a world of agents where we're sending off our little bots to dig up information for shopping, to dig up information on what the best approach to this is, the best approach to that is. The joke about the dead internet theory is interesting here. People were talking about the idea it'll just be bots creating content on the web. It's not going to matter because we're just going to have bots that are going to be patrolling the web looking for information to return back to you as individuals. And I find that in some way really fascinating, the idea that we're building the next version of the web for agents as opposed to for the visuals and the flashbang and stuff like this. So
I picture some guy sitting out there with a sign that says, "We'll read your website for food." We're creating a web that is agents.
How much do you want for that, by the way?
Agents serving agents.
If you think about it way back, right, before Google, if you were doing something on the internet, you needed to know the URL to go to a specific website. Then you got things like web crawler and meta crawler and all of these others. And then Google came out. And to me, this is just the next iteration of that evolution.
You know what's funniest about this? What's funniest about this is we've had all this backlash in the last year and a half about AI is crawling the web, right? And people, and including Cloudflare, had this thing where they were we will block AI crawlers at the source. Increasingly, if you're the person who's blocking AI crawlers to your site, if you're that person, you're an idiot, because you are blocking the ability of people that are using AIs to search for things, which is increasingly how people do it. Okay?
Yeah.
Like Google and others used to use...
The old world is gone.
But Google and others always used to use crawlers for their search engine.
Well, yes, but it wasn't an AI.
Yeah,
it was an AI,
It's-
but it wasn't an AI crawling.
Yeah.
We could have a whole discussion on this. Maybe we will, because there's some things that people are trying to be very clever about how they're doing this. I don't know if they're going to win or not, but they're trying to be very clever about doing this. Watch some of the Indian companies. You can't copy off their sites anymore. You can only copy a few lines. And so you can read it. So the AI can go read it, but it can't copy it out. And
Yeah, except that I can click my Claude Chrome extension, which will take screenshots of the web and navigate it for me. So this is all nonsense, and it's all pointless.
Peace, Padawan. I'm with you. I'm just saying that everybody's trying clever tricks now, but they can't escape the fundamental thing that if you can't let the AI see you, you don't exist.
That's
This
right.
is,
Yeah.
and so if you don't want to exist, that's great. But I suspect that the point of being on the web is that you want to tell somebody you exist. It's a weird thought, but I think it's true.
You know what? I envision that we're going to have two different internets. There's going to be the internet that everybody uses, okay, which is basically being crawled by AI agents. And then we're going to have the Amish web, which is...
That's me. Don't take Marcel's 7 stories. Come to Amish Web. I will tell you about technology, my friend. Mash with the back of the spoon. That's it. I'll be the black buggy. That's it. Okay, we can't go any further than that. No, we're going to leave them with that thought of Jim in a black buggy saying, I talked to you about technology.
In that case, then, if this is the wrap, we need to tell Tony how we wrap up.
Okay, yeah. Tony, you're going to watch this. Yeah. So it's really simple.
Tony?
The end of it. Yep.
Tony?
Yeah.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper, gentlemen.
Come on, Tony. Well. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.
All right. By the way, we got complaints and we didn't do that last week. So
seriously?
I wasn't here last week, so I blame myself.
Oh, that's okay. But
it's all your fault, Marcel.
Thank you, gentlemen. And that's Project Synapse for another week. We'll put a link to Raccoon in the show notes at technewsday.com or .ca. Take your pick. Just go to the podcast section. You can look in the notes. Or if you're seeing this on YouTube, then just check under the video. You'll find a link right there. We'd like to thank Meter for their support in bringing you this podcast. Meter delivers full-stack networking infrastructure, wired, wireless, and cellular to leading enterprises. Working with their partners, Meter designs, deploys, and manages everything required to get performant, reliable, and secure connectivity in a space. They design the hardware, the firmware, build the software, manage deployments, and run support. It's a single integrated solution that scales from branch offices to warehouses and large campuses to data centers. Book a demo at meter.com/HTT. That's meter.com/HTT. I'm your host, Jim Love. See you Monday morning.